Greetings, comrades, Sanbonani, and welcome to the live premiere of Luta Continua Dialogues. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and you can join the conversation with the hashtag Luta Students Rising. Episodes and references will be available on all our social media platforms and archived on South African History Online. My name is Didintle Ntsie, and I'll be your host as we journey through important topics affecting people who are organizing to make a difference in our world. Today's important conversation is all about student activism, particularly student activism in South Africa and in the United States. I must say that I am in the unique position of having my feet in both worlds. As a South African who has been living in the US for 4 years, I've been very excited for this opportunity for both worlds to come together. There are so many similarities and deep connections we need to explore, as well as key differences that we can all learn from. From South Africa, we have activists from Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, You Silence, We Amplify, and Save the University of Fort Hare's academic year. From the US, we have student activists from the New School University, Claiming Our Space, Black Student Union, and the National Institute for Reproductive Health. Our first contributor is Qondiswa James. You might know her from independent productions like The Foxy Five or High Fantasy, or perhaps her own theatre production, A Howl in Makanda, which premiered at the South African National Arts Festival earlier this year. Qondiswa was active in Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall and is very interested in performance art as an insurrectionary tool for movements. Welcome, Qondiswa. We are so happy to have you. You are literally our very first guest. Let's bring in Mbali. She is an ex-student from Herschel Girls High School, an elite, historically all-white girls' boarding school. In 2018, Mbali was selected for a rustic pathway scholarship to travel to the US and learn about the African-American struggle for racial justice. In 2019, Mbali was elected as a prefect and served in her high school's diversity and transformation portfolio. And this year, Mbali has started studying politics and social development at UCT, or should we say online with UCT, and will be featuring in an upcoming documentary by the Kenyan-based Nest Collective that would be all about young activism in the LGBTQIA+ feminist and POC communities. Welcome, Mbali. It's such a pleasure to have you, and we're really looking forward to hearing your voice in this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next contributor is Mihla Hanise. Mihla is a student at the University of Fort Hare. In 2018, he served as a chair of the Economic Freedom Fighters Student Council. In 2019, he was elected as a president of the Student Representative Council for the University of Fort Hare's East London campus. He has also served as a secretary of Student Council for Fort Hare's Faculty of Law students and was a founding chairperson of the university's Paralegal Society. Mihla has been part of calling for the institution to implement a policy to combat gender-based violence. He has campaigned to defend students from being financially excluded, and this year, Mihla has been helping defend students evicted from their residencies and even calling the government to task for further perpetuating unequal access during this time of dealing with COVID-19. Mihla, you are such a busy force, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the topics we have for today. We will now welcome our contributors and comrades from the United States. Hunter is a graduate of the New School University in New York City, where she earned a BA in Global Studies. Hunter has co-founded and led a number of initiatives designed to create space for students of color, including Students of Color Weekly, which catalyzed the founding of Claiming Our Space, a campaign that, among other focus areas, advocated for the need for a safer space away from the white gaze and institutionalized violence. Since graduating from the New School in spring 2019, Hunter has worked as a sexuality educator at the National Institute for Reproductive Health, where she connects with and uplifts Black youth in New York City. Welcome to our Luta Dialogues, Hunter.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Great. Next up is Kaz. Kaz, also known as Jade, is a filmmaker, musician, producer, and organizer based in New York City. Kaz is a student at the New School and has co-organized actions and healing spaces that center the voices and experiences of Black, Brown, and Indigenous queer folk, including Claiming Our Space, the Black Panel, and most recently, the New School strike of 2019, which called attention to the disregard for low-income students and students of color at the university. Kaz has also just released their first short documentary film called How We Love on Vimeo. It's a visual exploration of queer intimacy as the basis for artistic manifestation. Kaz will also be releasing their first album titled Next Self this month. You're quite the creative, Kaz. We are so excited to hear what you have to say and what your contributions will be to this discussion today.
Thank you so much. It's so beautiful to see all of you, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Anya Isabel, who is an artist, organizer, and educator from Los Angeles, California. She's an active co-organizer and a facilitator of spaces. In 2017, during her first year at Bard College, Anya joined Million Hoodies for Justice, a national network founded to protect and empower young people of color from mass incarceration, criminalization, and gun violence. She collaborated with a diverse student body to develop a list of demands, bringing attention to the inequality and glaring lack of support for Black, Indigenous people of color on Bard College's campus. Anya is now at the New School, where she's on the leadership team for the Black Student Union, which offers wellness programs, meaningful conversation, artist showcases, and action-oriented gatherings, including the institution's first ever public art show featuring and curated by Black students. In 2020, during the May semester, she was part of a team that called the university to account for neglecting low-income students of color who struggled to navigate during the COVID-19 pandemic. Anya, how are you doing? It's really wonderful to have you on this call today.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to see everyone, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thanks for making time. Now let's dive straight in. Every single one of you have done a lot of incredible work to help shape the world and to hold institutions accountable, specifically to young Black people like yourselves. How did you come to such a political understanding of not only the world, but of yourself and what you can do to make a change? Anyone, please feel free to jump in.
I don't mind giving a shot at it, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I think I was quite easily politicized because of my family and my upbringing. My father's side has always been really vocal. My grandparents were quite integral in the struggle. So like sacrifice and politics has always been a conversation starter, at the dinner table. And as a young Black person and as a young Black woman, your life is also politicized in everything and anything that you do, that it's kind of impossible to be ignorant to it or to really not access it in the way that it does affect you. Yeah, but I think it's definitely the socialization that is what informs your politics. Be it if you're Black, be it if you're a man, be it if you're a woman, be it if it's your socioeconomic background. Like those are the socializations that kind of feed into my politics and politicize myself as a young Black woman.
It's almost as if you kind of don't have a choice because of the body that you exist in and move through life with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, just to echo that sentiment. I think there's so much that was decided for me from a young age because of my identity as a third Black person. And I think I became a lot more politicized, having seen the ways in which things like my creativity and my education were being inhibited actively by others in power over me, or others who are of a higher authority, strictly based on what they assumed I could do or limitations they placed on me. And I think it had a lot to do with the public education system or any education system period in the U.S., which I'm sure we'll unpack that later, to where I saw obviously the layers of injustice that took place in that space. And that really, really motivated me to do a lot more work around centering the experiences of Black youth and Black students. And through that, it's been such a beautiful, overwhelming, challenging journey of politicization.
Yeah, can I come in?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, for me, the reason why I joined politics, it's very personal to me because when I was growing up, I never attended or I never had an opportunity to attend, I would say, a good school because I didn't have the means to pay for the school fees. So I attended a no-fee school or a public school in the context of South Africa. And to have to pass matric with distinctions, but you still struggle to pay for registration, you still struggle to gain access in the institution. So for me, I joined politics at the University of Fort Hare just because I wanted at least to provide a bright future for those that are going to come after me, for those that are like me, who are going to come from disadvantaged families, so that they can gain access in the institutions of higher learning. So the fight for me has been inspired by how I had a humble beginning and how I struggled in gaining access in the institutions of higher learning. So that is what has inspired me to be vocal and try to fight for those that are going to come after us. So that is what has inspired me in trying to bring about change in institutions of higher learning in South Africa.
Yeah. Qondiswa, I saw you nodding quite a lot when Mihla was speaking. What are your thoughts and what has your experience been in this role? I think you're muted. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Sorry. So I was just saying that I promise you, also the assumption, but also just the feeling that this is a life group of people. So also like similar I guess to Mbali, it's a lived thing, right? It's not something that you put on and you take off. But there's an experience frame that helps you to understand, I would say, and your position, whatever that position is. And I guess the choice to continue to see that as a political and then to take on acting in the world and the thing, right? The political frames around the position and the ways in which you reverberate with the ways in which your actions are politics. Yeah, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, yeah. Anya, Anta, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really agree with what Mali said because I think that we're already politicized whether we choose to participate in politics or not. I grew up in a very Black household, a very mixed, very cultural household, and a very white space. The neighborhood in the space, and I used to bus cross town to try and get to a better school. If I could get to a public school, it was across the it was a little bit of a better school. It would challenge me a little bit more, but have access to different education. And I think that from the get-go, my family has been a huge part of politicizing me, making me aware. They were taking us to us when we were kids, so it didn't seem like a hard decision. It felt very normal to be involved in activism, to be involved in things. I live in Los Angeles, I grew up in Los Angeles, and there's a massive houseless population here. Activism for me started there. It started with feeding people in our teams that didn't have homes. And so when you start there, you start working towards saying, well, why is there so much inequality and why is it always with us? And that's really where it started. And then you go to school, and you were fortunate enough. I was very fortunate to get into university, and then I was able to start growing and start learning, start understanding things a little better, understanding systems. And I wouldn't want to do anything else. You know, I love what we do.
Hunter?
Yeah, yeah, I can jump in. I think for me, as far as like personally, relate a lot of what people have shared it resonates, and I think for me, my experience for much of my childhood and then into kind of my late teens, I was navigating most of my identity from like a means in the world alone. Like I didn't really have um, peers or adults in my life that could understand exactly what it meant to be a Black person in my hometown. And then I think what changed, so I think there in that was this really intimate feeling of wanting life to be different and wanting what I was going through and sort of the hardships I was handling by myself to not be different. And I think also growing up, my mother always instilled in me, like if I have something to pass it on, like I think we always have like an open door policy with friends. Like I have somewhere to live as long as I have a roof over my head, you do too. And I think kind of having that upbringing, and to the point where I later on did get connected with a couple mentors later in high school who I think really kind of helped me formulate and activate into actually providing that on a larger scale. And so I think I've always had this kind of instinct to create collectives and to find chosen family. And I think those two things really came together. And so I think in terms of sort of political awareness and finding space, I didn't really come to it in a thought of I'm an activist and I'm doing some sort of like political work. I think it was much more a feeling of necessity of, like my friend says, like we're all we got. And I want to commit my life, my time, and my labor to sustaining us, because who else is going to? And so I think that's what kind of has like naturally evolved into creating a space for people of color, working with Black youth, and specifically, you know, in many ways like queer Black youth, because it's as we can see, like that's very hard to come by. And I think knowing intimately the consequences of not having those spaces. And so, yeah, I think that's where those kind of like confluence of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you mentioned about, I'm sorry, what you mentioned about just this feeling of necessity and feeling that you needed to take matters into your own hands in order to get things done is something that I think is like a common thread for most activists. And this actually kind of sparks this idea of like what happened at Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, which was quite a big moment in South Africa. It created a big political shift. And I kind of want to zoom in on that a little bit, and South African activism. So in 2015, Chumani Makwele threw poo collected from a township in South Africa on a statue of the colonizer Cecil John Rhodes. It sat prominently at the University of Cape Town, and it sparked outrage, eventually a nationwide conversation about the ongoing reality of colonization and poor living conditions for the majority of Black people in South Africa. For many people, this moment led to a political awakening as the myth of the post-apartheid rainbow nation was laid open and bare for everyone to see. And words like decolonization, intersectionality, institutionalized racism were taken to the mainstream. We also noticed and witnessed that deeply held racist narratives started coming up, coming up from the surface to the surface from Facebook friends, parents, colleagues, professors, and even some news outlets that were obviously reflecting a nation that was grappling with colonial legacies and the infrastructure. So I'd like to know from the South African activists on this conversation, were you and your peers having these conversations before the Fallist movements began? And was there anything that shifted for you before the Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, and Fallist movements began, and now and afterwards? Were there any shifts for you, and were you having these conversations beforehand? Qondiswa, I know that you were quite deeply involved. You were at the
So, I would say when I stepped into university, I mean, God, it's so difficult. You are experiencing things and you are talking about things, not using the words that have now become the vocab. And sometimes there is an impulsive feeling, maybe something like something that you say to your peer or your friend or whatever, even in high school, offhand thing, a critique of something that you don't even understand is political, is, you know, like deeply historical, and break apart the entire foundation of like them. But something happens, right? And maybe even happens at an age for you where you're able to relate to it in a particular way. And then you're like, ah, shit, that's the language. That's the. So I'll say that, yes, we live in South Africa. Like, always been talking about these things, even in history class, even at home, like being in a village, watching the news, talking to parents, just small little things, the ways in which our lives, the personal is always political, you know.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And I think that what you described about, you were experiencing things, you were having conversations, you were describing moments, you were describing emotions and experiences that you were having, but just didn't have the language that we now use to kind of label those things. So in a sense, maybe the language is what's changed around naming and labeling experiences that we were already having. I would like to hear from you, Mbali and Mihla. Were these conversations you were having because you were all at different points in your lives when the Fallist movements began? And so I'm curious about how that kind of shaped whether or not these conversations were happening, how you felt about them, and if, you know, that big watershed, I would say it was a watershed moment for South Africa, if that shifted anything from before and after for you and your conversations and how you felt with your peers.
For me, when the Fallist movement started, I was still doing grade 11. I was not yet in varsity in 2015. From that age, in a history class, you'd know that there are divides in the society that existed that we knew about. But the Fallist movement, I think for me, was an age of enlightenment where we come to realize that with the freedom that we have been given is not what we are experiencing at the grassroots level. So the Fallist movement became an age of enlightenment for us, aspirant students. And when we came in 2017 at the University of Fort Hare, the Fallist movement was still topical. And that part of what has happened during that time has managed to shape us as the youngsters in the revolution, and we have managed to draw inspiration as we are still continuing with that fight. Because one thing that you must note is that after 2015, 2016, the declaration of free education was a cosmetic arrangement. It was a feudal type declaration that we are not experiencing or getting as the students. So we are still in that fight, and the discussion are still there because Blake Zimande has resurfaced again, and there are new problems that are existing in the sector in relation to free education. So those discussions have existed before, and they are still existing, and as to how then do we try by all means to spark the discussion and try by all means to bring back Fees Must Fall, because what is happening at this point in time in South Africa is very disturbing when you find that there are students who are still facing financial exclusion after the President Jacob Zuma pronounced free education. We have still students who can't get access. We have students who are not funded by the government. So it's something that is going to resurface in the political landscape in regards to student activism.
Exactly. Just to draw attention to something, one of the things that you mentioned is that government, a lot of us rely a lot on government to provide safety, basic human rights, to be very honest. And I'm curious to understand, Mbali, were you one of the young people who did have faith in our government, who did believe that our government, you know, it had our back, either the Constitution, the Bill of Rights is something that means something, and, you know, the Fallist movement is going to shift things?
Okay, that is a loaded question. So I'll try address every part of it. I think because the stage of my life that I was in when the Flawless movement began, I was in grade 8. I just started at this really elite all-girls school in the suburbs. I mean, I'd lived in the suburbs my whole life. I like to socialize as a white person because there wasn't much culture or much of a black presence in the communities that I found myself living in. And so looking at the movement was the kind of guidance that I needed in terms of my politics and really finding where I was at. From the rhetoric that I understand of South Africa, it's almost the norm to bash the government and to shame them really for the corruption, because it's all we see, right? It floods our news and our outlets, it floods the media. The government is corrupt and that, they're taking taxpayers' money. So that had kind of been the voice that had been pushed onto me, and that was super influential because of the spaces that I was in. But what that looked like, right, were white populations of people, be it my friends, be it my peers, talking about a black government that doesn't know what they're doing, and that they're running the country poorly, and that in apartheid, while it might have been racist and obviously a huge human rights violation, they would talk about how the economy was thriving, or how the country was better, it was quote unquote safer, because it ticks all of these boxes, but there's this huge elephant in the room that no one is addressing. So it's been influential to my politics in that right. However, my parents have always emphasized that because the ANC was the party that liberated them, that got them the jobs that they have, that let them live in the areas that they wanted to, there's an almost obligated allegiance and allyship to a party that has done much for you and for your people. And so in terms of my politics, when it does come to, government, I mean, I don't really disclose my political views that much. I'm 18, or I'm actually 19 recently, and I can now vote, and I can use that vote, which I think is phenomenal. It's something that so many people have fought for and really did die for. But it isn't an election time now. So I think the first time I will vote, I'll be 22, 23. And just having to look at that scope now already, understanding how fundamental it is. I've been following the American race with your presidential candidates, and I have family that lives in the States, so it's kind of a consistent conversation. It's kind of a consistent conversation. I mean, it's one of those things, is that having to look at politics through every single lens and having to count all the factors, because sure, they might not be, but are my reproductive rights still being defended? It's all of these really fearful kind of that we place in the hands of people who we don't know are capable or not. And so I'm in this almost disillusionment, this twilight zone of not really knowing what is going on and who I'm going to vote for and who I can invest my trust in. And it's an obvious decision that I do have to make. But because politics in South Africa is so racialized, just like your existence, there are connotations to parties and their designated race groups. So the types of people that will vote for them and the kind of policies that they'll push for. And trying to navigate that as a young black person who has grown up in socialized white environments is difficult, because you don't know to listen to your identity or to your environment. So my personal politics are all over the place, I have to say. But if it wasn't for Flawless movements, if it wasn't for activists such as yourself, which are all older than me, mind you, you guys walked the road so I could run. And so I have the vocabulary to talk about my politics and how I identify and what I want to better, not only in my local community, but in the world, because I have the equipment, I have the tools that all of you have given me. So, yeah.
100%. And